Hello. Let's do a deep dive of my new plugin Coastline and take a look at its audio matrix. The audio matrix is where Coastline becomes a totally modular and configurable effect. This tutorial is going to assume a basic knowledge of tide and glade, so make sure to watch those videos first if you need to. The audio matrix was inspired by West Coast synthesis and complex oscillators. These are oscillators where two simple sound sources, like two sine waves or two triangle waves, can be modulated together to produce interesting results. The process and the results are heavily influenced by the timbre of the sound running into it and the pitch or the difference in pitch between them. And these are all really interesting things to experiment and mess around with. The audio matrix kind of tries to build out this West Coast synthesis paradigm for any audio in Coastline or with generic samples or really anything. The audio matrix lets you make 4 different assignments. To move between them, you just click them here at the bottom. You can load a number of sound sources to be the source of your modulation. And then you can set what you're targeting. You can target any of the 4 main channels in Coastline, that being tide, glade, the input, or the reverb. But we have more sources available to us if we want. So the simplest way to use the audio matrix is with tide modulating tide, or really anything kind of creating this feedback loop. I'm just going to record something, and we can hear the results of it as we change the amount of modulation in the audio matrix. So as we turn this up, we're essentially introducing a feedback loop here, and we're going to get an increasing amount of distortion. At extreme levels, it kind of really becomes a distortion. And this process is really dependent on kind of what you're running into it. If you run a very simple sound source into it, we're just kind of do some wave folding or kind of wave shaping, basically. But if we start to introduce multiple frequencies, and especially some kind of pitch divergence, all of a sudden, we're going to start having some really interesting effects here. We can also use one channel to modulate another. And the tide channel is kind of a great sound design source. A lot of times I'll mute tide entirely and maybe bring on glade. And let's have tide modulate glade. We can kind of hear the effects of tide as they kind of get superimposed onto glade. But keep in mind that we're not actually hearing tide at all. We're just kind of hearing the effects of it, which can be a really interesting thing to kind of mess around with. A lot of times I'll kind of make tide just kind of this like utility oscillator that we can use to do some really interesting things with. We can also use the filter here to kind of really dial in that distortion. So this is kind of a really wide bandpass filter where we can set the width of it and the center. By default, because the width is 100%, it's kind of just the full frequency spectrum. But if we reduce that, we'll kind of start hearing this bandpass filter. And we can really start to move that around and hear different effects. This effect gets more obvious if we kind of introduce some wave shaping here. So with these two things together, we can kind of really dial in exactly what we want to hear. Another thing that can be interesting is playing around with different pitches. So we could put tide down an octave to get a bit this more darker kind of distortion that's a bit more rooted down in the lower frequencies. We could also have them be kind of a random pitch ratio as well. You know, what if it were a major third down, or, you know, 9 semitones higher? You can start to experiment with what the effects of these things can be. So another thing we can do in the audio matrix is we can load noise as a source as well. You can see here we have white noise and pink noise. This is a nice way just to add a little bit of grit and distortion, maybe just a touch of it. And you can kind of choose the character by selecting from the white noise or the pink noise. And again, we can filter this. But this can be a really nice way just to add a little bit of kind of dirt on top of whatever you're doing. It can help make the output of Coastline kind of stand out against the input a little bit more. And you can just add a nice little texture on top of everything. Another thing that we can do in the audio matrix is that we can use field samples here as well. So we have these two basic noise sources, but we can also kind of load a sample and treat it like a noise source. Coastline ships with a number of built-in field samples that you can use to get started and just kind of impose a sort of naturalistic sound on your on the output of Coastline. So I'm going to choose wind to start. And when we load a sample into Coastline, it's basically going to loop it infinitely in a kind of big, long, granular process. So it loops it, but it kind of changes over time. It never really loops the same way twice. And it kind of really turns this sample into an infinite source of noise and sound. Let's just hear this wind modulating the tide. You can hear it's already different than just using the white noise or the pink noise. It kind of has ebbs and flows to it. Let's try something else. We can try rain. You can really hear that pitter-patter in there. I think this is a nice way to kind of take this one step beyond just loading white noise or pink noise and kind of adding something pretty unique. When we have a sample loaded, we can change the pitch of it, which we can use to kind of dial in the speed and the response of it. And of course, we still have this filter up top as well. Okay, so let's load something with its own tonality into this. Because in Coastline, we can also just load any sample as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up an interesting sample by Blank Forms that will have a lot of kind of texture and tonality into it. Let's try this. This is looks like a G chord. And we're going to hear that kind of start to modulate whatever this chord is that I played into Tide. Let's start to get some really interesting different tonal effects here. We can play around with that relationship too. Maybe put it up a seventh or something. And keep in mind, we're not actually hearing this sample. We are hearing its effect on Tide. So we can kind of get some really interesting things here. It can be really interesting just to kind of get two things talking to each other and affecting each other. Another thing I want to point out is that you can use the audio matrix to affect the input. This is essentially going to turn Coastline into a distortion on your audio signal. So I like to use tide to modulate the input. And basically what we're going to end up doing is we're going to kind of create this distortion that follows along tonally as we start to record different things, and it just kind of mirrors your input to some extent as you continue to play and record more things. So let's hear the results of that. You can decide how many sustainers are running at once. Also kind of how gradual the changes are. You can also change the pitch of tide, maybe put it down an octave. And this can be something really interesting to experiment with, because it kind of takes Coastline from this atmosphere generator into something that can actually distort your audio signal in a really unique way. And the last thing I want to point out is that we can also choose Coastline's sidechain input as a modulation source. So we can use that to kind of modulate basically two sounds together in a really unique way. We can even just bypass the entire recording aspect of Coastline and just kind of use it to combine two different sounds. So I'm going to load up a little drum loop or something like that, and then we can hear the results of that as it affects the piano sound or maybe some other sound. Let's try a pad sound too. So I think this can be a really interesting and really unique effect. You can also play around with which is the sound source and which is the modulator. You could reverse this configuration, load Coastline onto the other track, and have the original input now sidechain that track. There's a lot to explore here, and I think it's really interesting and has a lot of really fun effects. All of this can be modulated with the modulation matrix as well, just to push it one step further. But yeah, I hope you have a lot of fun with the audio matrix, because I think it's probably the most unique part of Coastline, and really kind of lets you take all of these tools in your toolbox, start to mold them and combine them together in ways that you might not have thought to do otherwise. So I would encourage you to check it out, and take care.